Let me take you back to the day everything changed. It's strange how life can seem so normal one moment and then spiral out of control the next. That's exactly what happened to me in Maplewood Heights, a neighborhood that looked perfect on the surface, but hid something darker beneath. When my wife, Claire, and I first moved into our home, it felt like a dream come true. The houses were neat, the lawns were green, and everyone seemed friendly. We thought we'd found the ideal place to settle down and build a future for our family. But little did we know, living here came with strings attached. Strings controlled by the Homeowners Association, or HOA. At first, the HOA didn't seem like a big deal. They sent occasional reminders about keeping our yard tidy or parking cars only in designated areas. Nothing too serious. I figured it was just their way of maintaining order and making sure the neighborhood stayed nice. After all, isn't that why people join communities like this? To keep things looking good. But over time, those small reminders turned into demands, and those demands started feeling more like orders. It wasn't long before we realized the HOA had rules for everything. Want to paint your front door red? Not allowed. Thinking of planting flowers in your garden? Better check the approved color palette first. Even hanging a wind chime outside your window required permission. It got worse when the fines started rolling in. One morning, I opened a letter saying we owed money because our mailbox was too close to the curb. Another time, they fined us for leaving a ladder leaning against the garage overnight. Every little thing became an issue, and every issue came with a price tag. It felt like they weren't just policing our property, they were policing our lives. Then came the day that pushed me over the edge. I was having coffee in the kitchen when I heard footsteps in the backyard. At first, I thought it might be Claire or the kids playing outside, but when I peeked through the window, I saw a man walking around our flower beds with a clipboard in his hand. He wasn't there to admire the roses. He was inspecting them. I stepped outside, confused and irritated. "Can I help you?" I asked. He barely glanced at me. "Routine inspection," he said, as if it were completely normal to wander onto someone's private property without asking. I couldn't believe it. This was my home, my land, and here was some stranger treating it like it belonged to him. I tried to stay calm, explaining that no one had given him permission to come onto our property. But he ignored me, scribbling notes and snapping photos like he owned the place. That's when I lost it. My mind raced with frustration and anger. All the pent-up resentment from months of dealing with the HOA boiled over. Without thinking, I reached for the gun I kept under the counter. Not to shoot, not to harm, but to make a point. I wanted him to understand that this was my space, and he didn't belong there. As I walked toward him, holding the gun loosely at my side, I could see the shock on his face. "You need to leave," I said firmly. He didn't argue. He practically ran to his car and sped off. Standing there alone, heart pounding, I realized I'd crossed a line. What had I done? Would they arrest me? Shoo me? Kick us out of the neighborhood? I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. There was no going back now. The moment the inspector sped away, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, and a strange sense of satisfaction. For once, I had stood my ground. But as the adrenaline faded, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. What had I just done? Pulling out a gun, even if I hadn't pointed it or fired it, was extreme. The weight of my actions settled heavily on my shoulders. Claire found me still standing in the backyard, staring at the spot where the inspector had been moments earlier. Her eyes widened when she saw the gun in my hand. "Mark, what were you thinking?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what this could mean?" I tried to explain, but my words sounded hollow even to me. "He had no right to be here," I said weakly. "No one invited him. He treated our home like it was his business." "It doesn't matter," Claire snapped, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't pull a gun on someone because they're being annoying. You've put us all in danger." Her reaction only made me feel worse. She was right. I'd acted impulsively, letting my anger get the better of me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done what needed to be done. Wasn't it my duty to protect my family and our property? Or had I just made things infinitely worse? By evening, word of what happened had spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. People whispered behind closed doors, pointing fingers and speculating about what kind of person would bring a weapon into a dispute over flower beds. Some neighbors avoided us altogether, while others gave us disapproving looks whenever we passed by. It was as if an invisible wall had gone up between us and the rest of Maplewood Heights. Then came the letter, a formal notice from the HOA informing me that I was being sued for harassment and intimidation. My stomach churned as I read the document. They weren't just accusing me of overreacting. They were painting me as some kind of unstable menace who posed a threat to the entire community. Claire begged me to apologize, to smooth things over before it escalated further. "We can't afford a legal battle," she pleaded. "Think about the kids, Mark. Think about what this will do to them." I wanted to listen to her. I really did. But every time I imagined backing down, I remembered how powerless I'd felt before. The constant fines, the invasive inspections, the endless rules dictating how we lived our lives. It wasn't fair. And now, after finally standing up for myself, I was being punished for it. As the days dragged on, the tension between Claire and me grew unbearable. She couldn't understand why I refused to back down, and I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to her. We argued late into the night, our voices low so the kids wouldn't hear. "You're acting like a child," she said during one particularly heated exchange. "You can't solve everything by fighting." "I'm not trying to fight," I shot back. "I'm trying to stand up for us, for our family. Why is that so hard for you to understand?" But the truth was, I didn't fully understand it myself. Part of me knew I'd gone too far, that pulling a gun, even as a bluff, was reckless and irresponsible. Yet another part of me clung to the belief that I'd done the right thing. If I backed down now, wouldn't that prove the HOA was untouchable? Wouldn't it show them they could walk all over anyone who dared challenge their authority? Every knock on the door made my heart race, wondering if it was the police coming to arrest me. Every phone call sent a jolt of panic through my body. Sleep became impossible, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Would I lose my job, my house, my freedom? And yet, despite all the fear and uncertainty, there was a tiny flicker of hope buried deep inside me. Maybe, just maybe, this mess could lead to something bigger. Maybe my actions, however misguided, would force people to see the HOA for what it really was, a group of bullies masquerading as caretakers. If nothing else, I told myself, at least I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. The quiet life we'd once known in Maplewood Heights was gone forever. The days that followed felt like living in a storm. Every morning, I woke up dreading what new trouble might come my way. The lawsuit loomed over us like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on everything we did. Even simple tasks, like taking the kids to school or going grocery shopping, felt different now. Neighbors who used to smile and wave acted as if they didn't recognize me anymore. Some avoided eye contact entirely, while others whispered behind their hands when they thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't just strangers either. Friends we trusted started pulling away. One afternoon, I ran into Tom, a guy I played basketball with on weekends. He hesitated when he saw me, then gave a quick nod before hurrying off without saying a word. That stung more than I expected. It wasn't just the HOA coming after me. It felt like the whole neighborhood had turned its back. Claire tried her best to hold things together, but the stress was wearing her down too. She spent hours researching lawyers online, scrolling through reviews and articles about HOA disputes. "We need someone good," she said one night, rubbing her temples. "Someone who knows how to handle cases like this." I nodded but didn't say much. Truthfully, I wasn't sure anyone could help us. The HOA had money, connections, and experience fighting battles like this. What chance did we have against them? Still, I couldn't bring myself to give up. Not yet. Then came the protests. Signs started popping up around the neighborhood. Safety first, and protect our community. They weren't subtle hints. They were clearly aimed at me. At first, I thought it was just the HOA stirring the pot, trying to make me look bad. But soon, I realized some of our neighbors genuinely believed I was the problem. They saw me as a loose cannon, someone who had crossed a line and needed to be stopped. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, a group of people gathered across the street. They weren't loud or aggressive, but their presence was unmistakable. A few held signs, while others simply stood there, arms crossed, glaring in my direction. I wanted to march over and confront them, to tell them exactly why I had done what I did, but something held me back. Maybe it was Claire's voice in my head, warning me not to make things worse, or maybe it was the sinking realization that no explanation would change their minds. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in my mind. How had it come to this? When did standing up for yourself become an act of war? And why did everyone seem so eager to side with the HOA instead of questioning whether they were truly in the right? The next day brought another blow. An email arrived from the HOA's lawyer, outlining their demands. Not only did they want me to issue a public apology, but they also insisted I pay for damages caused by my behavior, including the cost of hiring extra security for the inspector I confronted. Reading those words made my blood boil. Damages for defending my property. It was absurd. Claire burst into tears when she read the email. "They're trying to ruin us," she sobbed. "Financially, emotionally. They don't care as long as they win." Her words hit hard because I knew she was right. This wasn't about justice or fairness. It was about control. The HOA wanted to crush anyone who dared challenge their authority, and I'd given them the perfect excuse to do just that. For the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered giving in. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe apologizing and paying the fines was the smartest move. After all, what choice did we have? We couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, and dragging our family through this chaos wasn't fair to the kids. But even as I entertained the idea, something inside me rebelled. If I backed down now, wouldn't it prove the HOA was untouchable? Wouldn't it show them, and everyone else, that they could intimidate anyone into submission? As I wrestled with these thoughts, a knock at the door startled me. Standing on the porch was Mr. Peterson, the elderly man who lived 3 doors down. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held out a folder stuffed with papers. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to them," he said quietly. "Maybe you're the one who can finally make a difference." His words caught me off guard. For weeks, I'd felt like the entire world was against me. But here was someone, a neighbor, no less, who believed in what I was doing. In that moment, I realized I wasn't alone. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it by myself. Mr. Peterson's visit felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in deep water. I invited him inside, still clutching the folder he'd handed me. His hand shook slightly as he lowered himself into a chair, and for a moment, I wondered if he was nervous or scared. Whatever it was, it made me sit up straighter, more alert. Something about the way he carried himself told me this wasn't just a casual neighborly chat. "I've been fighting them for years," he began, his voice low and steady, though I could hear the weight of emotion behind it. "They think they can do whatever they want because no one fights back. But you're different." I wasn't sure how to respond. Me, different. All I'd done was lose my temper and make a bad situation worse. But Mr. Peterson didn't see it that way. To him, I represented hope. A chance to stand against the very system that had crushed him. He opened the folder and spread out documents on the coffee table. Letters, emails, official HOA notices, bank statements. It was overwhelming at first glance. As he explained each piece, I realized these weren't just random papers. They were evidence of a pattern. The HOA had targeted specific homeowners, piling on fines and inspections until people either gave in or left altogether. Mr. Peterson's own story hit hardest. He showed me letters demanding fees for violations that didn't exist. Things like grass being half an inch too long or curtains not matching the approved color scheme. When he couldn't pay, they foreclosed on his late wife's medical equipment fund. "They ruined us," he said, his voice cracking. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. I promised myself I wouldn't let them win again. And now, seeing you take a stand, even if it's messy, it gives me hope. His words struck a chord deep inside me. For weeks, I'd felt like the villain in this story, the guy who went too far and brought shame on his family. But here was Mr. Peterson, looking at me like I was some kind of hero. It wasn't about the gun anymore. It was about what it represented: defiance, resistance, a refusal to stay silent while people got pushed around. With his help, we started piecing together a strategy. The documents he collected were gold, proof that the HOA wasn't just strict. They were predatory. We needed someone who could turn this evidence into action, someone with experience battling organizations like theirs. That's when Claire stepped in. She'd spent hours researching lawyers online and found one named Ms. Hartley, known for taking on HOA cases. Her reviews were glowing, filled with stories of homeowners who'd been backed into corners only to come out victorious thanks to her sharp legal mind. We called her office immediately, explaining our situation in frantic detail. To our relief, she agreed to meet us the next day. Meeting Ms. Hartley felt like stepping into a war room. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had a way of cutting through the chaos to focus on what mattered most. When we showed her the folder of documents, her eyes lit up. "This is exactly what we need," she said, flipping through the pages. "It's not just your case anymore. It's a class action lawsuit waiting to happen." Her confidence was contagious. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe we had a shot. Maybe this wasn't just about saving ourselves. Maybe it was about exposing the truth and protecting others from going through the same nightmare. But as exciting as it was to finally have a plan, doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Could we really take down an organization that had operated unchecked for so long? What if we lost? What if things got even worse? Claire must have seen the hesitation on my face, because she reached over and squeezed my hand. "We've come this far," she said softly. "Let's see it through." And so, with Mr. Peterson's evidence, Ms. Hartley's expertise, and a fragile but growing sense of determination, we prepared for the fight of our lives. The HOA thought they'd already won, that I'd crumble under pressure and apologize. But they were wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. Claire was beside me, her face pale but determined. Across from us, the HOA's team looked confident, too confident. Their lawyer, a polished man in an expensive suit, shuffled through papers with an air of smug superiority. It was clear they thought this was going to be an easy win. Ms. Hartley leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We got this." Her words were meant to reassure me, but my stomach still churned. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. Every accusation they threw at me felt like another punch to the gut. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. As the proceedings began, the HOA's lawyer painted a picture of me as a reckless, dangerous individual who had terrorized their inspector and disrupted the peace of the neighborhood. He called witnesses, neighbors who testified about how intimidating I'd become after pulling the gun. One woman even claimed she no longer felt safe letting her kids play outside because of me. Each testimony stung, not because it was true, but because it twisted reality into something unrecognizable. I wanted to shout, to tell them that none of this would have happened if the HOA hadn't treated us like prisoners in our own homes. But Ms. Hartley had warned me to stay quiet, so I clenched my jaw and listened. When it was our turn, Ms. Hartley stood up, her presence commanding respect. She started by dismantling the HOA's narrative piece by piece. "My client isn't on trial for defending his property," she said firmly. "He's being punished for standing up to an organization that has abused its power for years." Then came the evidence Mr. Peterson had gathered. Email chains showed how the HOA had targeted specific homeowners, piling on fines until people broke financially or emotionally. Bank records revealed questionable spending. Money meant for community improvements funneled into private accounts. And then there were the photos. Inspectors trespassing on private property without permission, documenting minor infractions just to justify more fees. As each document was presented, the HOA's lawyer grew visibly uneasy. His attempts to discredit the evidence fell flat, especially when Ms. Hartley cross-examined their president, Ms. Harper. She started calmly, asking simple questions about the rules and enforcement policies. But soon, her tone shifted, becoming razor-sharp. "Isn't it true," she asked, "that your organization has fined residents for violations that aren't explicitly stated in the covenants?" Ms. Harper hesitated before answering. "Well, we interpret the guidelines based on what's best for the community." "And isn't it also true," Ms. Hartley pressed, "that these interpretations often result in financial gain for the HOA?" The room went silent. Ms. Harper squirmed in her seat, avoiding eye contact. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the momentum had shifted. Ms. Hartley summarized everything perfectly, highlighting how the HOA had weaponized rules and intimidation tactics to control homeowners. "This case isn't about one man's actions," she concluded. "It's about holding an abusive organization accountable. If we allow this behavior to continue unchecked, what message does that send? That power trumps fairness. That fear is acceptable governance." Her words resonated throughout the courtroom. Even some of the jurors nodded subtly, their expressions thoughtful. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. But as we waited for the verdict, doubt crept back in. What if the judge sided with the HOA? What if all of this was for nothing? Claire squeezed my hand again, her touch grounding me. No matter what happened next, we'd fought back, and that alone made us stronger than we'd been before. The day the verdict was announced felt like it stretched on forever. I sat in the courtroom, my leg bouncing uncontrollably under the table. Claire held my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin, but I didn't mind. It kept me grounded. Across the room, the HOA's team whispered among themselves, their earlier confidence now replaced by uneasy glances and fidgeting hands. Even Ms. Harper looked pale, her usual authoritative demeanor cracking. When the judge finally entered, the room fell silent. The air seemed heavier than before, pressing down on all of us as we waited for her to speak. She adjusted her glasses and began reading from a sheet of paper, her voice calm but firm. "After reviewing the evidence presented during this trial," she said, pausing briefly, "it is clear that the defendant's actions, while ill-advised, were provoked by repeated violations of his rights as a homeowner. Furthermore, the court finds substantial proof of systemic misconduct by the Homeowners Association, including harassment, misuse of funds, and discriminatory enforcement of rules." My heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? "The lawsuit filed against Mr. Your last name is hereby dismissed," she continued. "Additionally, the HOA will pay damages for emotional distress caused to the defendant. Furthermore, due to the severity of these findings, the court orders the immediate dissolution of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association." Gasps erupted around the room. Some neighbors audibly cheered, while others sat frozen in disbelief. The HOA's lawyer buried his face in his hands, muttering something under his breath. Ms. Harper looked like she'd been slapped. Her mouth hung open, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was as if my brain refused to process what had just happened. Then Claire grabbed my arm and shook me gently. "We won," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, we actually won." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. followed quickly by a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle: joy, disbelief, vindication. I wanted to stand up and shout, to hug everyone who had supported us. But instead, I just sat there, letting the reality sink in. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, shoving microphones in our faces and asking for statements. Word had spread fast about the ruling, and suddenly, I wasn't just some guy who'd pulled a gun. I was a symbol of resistance against an abusive system. People approached me, thanking me for standing up to the HOA. Some admitted they'd been too scared to fight back themselves, while others shared stories of how the HOA had ruined their lives. But not everyone celebrated. A few neighbors still glared at me, convinced I'd gone too far. One man even muttered, "This doesn't fix anything," as he walked past. His words stung, but I understood where they came from. Not everyone saw me as a hero. To some, I was still the guy who lost control and made things worse before making them better. Back home, the kids ran to greet us, unaware of the weight of what had happened. They laughed and played, blissfully innocent of the chaos that had consumed our lives for months. Watching them reminded me why I'd fought so hard, to protect them, to give them a safe place to grow up without fear of being bullied by people who thought they knew better. That night, Claire and I sat on the porch, sipping tea in silence. The tension between us had eased, though I could tell she was still processing everything. Finally, she spoke. "You scared me half to death. You know that." "I know," I replied softly. "And I'm sorry. But would you have wanted me to back down?" She sighed, staring out at the darkened street. No, I wouldn't." Her admission meant more to me than any court victory ever could. We weren't completely healed. Not yet. But we were moving forward together. As the days turned into weeks, life in Maplewood Heights began to change. Without the HOA looming over everyone, the neighborhood relaxed. People started painting their front doors whatever colors they liked, planting wildflowers in their gardens, and leaving bikes on their lawns without fear of fines. For the first time in years, it felt like a real community again. Still, the scars remained. For me, for Claire, and for many of our neighbors. Winning the battle didn't erase the pain of the war, but it gave us hope. And sometimes, hope is enough to start rebuilding. Months have passed since the HOA was dissolved, and life in Maplewood Heights feels almost unrecognizable. The once oppressive rules that dictated every detail of our lives are gone, replaced by a newfound sense of freedom. Neighbors who used to tiptoe around regulations now laugh openly on their porches, decorating their homes however they please. Holiday lights stay up longer than approved. Flower beds burst with colors never seen before, and kids ride bikes down the streets without anyone worrying about fines for leaving toys outside. But as much as things have improved, I can't help but reflect on everything we went through. Winning the lawsuit didn't magically erase the toll it took on my family, or me. Claire and I spent weeks talking late into the night, trying to mend what had been broken between us. She admitted she'd been scared, not just of the HOA or the legal battle, but of losing me to anger and frustration. I told her how guilty I felt for dragging her and the kids into something so ugly, for letting my temper spiral out of control. Those conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary. Slowly, we began rebuilding trust, one honest word at a time. The neighborhood itself has also changed. Some people still avoid me, convinced I crossed a line I shouldn't have. Others, though, treat me differently, not with fear, but with respect. They see me as someone who stood up when no one else would, even if the way I did it wasn't perfect. Mr. Peterson visits often now, bringing cookies his late wife used to bake. He calls me a spark that lit a fire, though I'm not sure I deserve the credit. If anything, he's the real hero, the one who risked sharing his story to give us ammunition against the HOA. One day, while mowing the lawn, I noticed a neighbor putting up a sign in her yard. "Welcome to Maplewood Heights, a community reborn." It made me smile. For years, this place had been weighed down by fear and resentment, but now there's hope. People talk more, share more, look out for each other. It's not perfect. Nothing ever is, but it's better. Still, I've learned some hard lessons along the way. Pulling that gun was reckless, no matter how justified I felt in the moment. Anger doesn't solve problems. It creates new ones. But neither does silence. There's a balance somewhere between standing your ground and knowing when to step back, and finding that balance is something I'll work on for the rest of my life. Claire says I've changed since all this started. She's right. I'm quieter now, more thoughtful. I think twice before reacting, weigh consequences instead of jumping headfirst into conflict. And yet, there's a part of me that will always be proud of what I did, not because of the gun, but because I refused to let fear rule my life anymore. That defiance, flawed as it was, sparked change not just for me, but for everyone here. At night, when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I sometimes sit on the porch and watch the stars. I think about where we started, how trapped we all felt under the HOA's thumb. Back then, I couldn't imagine breaking free. Now, looking at the laughter spilling out of open windows and the colorful gardens lining the streets, I realize how far we've come. We're not the same people we were before. None of us are. This fight left its mark, shaping us in ways we're still figuring out. But maybe that's okay. Maybe scars aren't such a bad thing. They remind you of battles fought, lessons learned, and victories won. As I sit there, listening to the hum of crickets and distant voices, I feel a deep gratitude, not just for the outcome, but for the journey. Because even in the darkest moments, when it felt like the world was against us, we found a way to stand together. And that, more than anything, is what saved us.